That's why more and more Lagosians are tuning in.
500,000 Lagosians.
720,000.
970,000.
Over 1 million Lagosians, they know that if you give me your afternoon, I will give you hard facts.
Northern Sandra all to going beyond the headlines and focus on the facts.
I am Sandra Ezekwesili, and these are your hard facts.
Hello, Lagos. Good afternoon. I am Sandra Ezekwesili, and these are your hard facts. First hard fact of the day: the U.S. mission in Nigeria says that they have rescued two of their colleagues who were missing after the attack on the 16th of May in Anambra. They said that those missing are alive and safe. And of course, they are mourning the loss of their other colleagues and 4 police escorts who were advancing humanitarian work in Anambra State. They said that in a media statement this afternoon, just before I got on air. So that story is still unfolding. Soludo says he's on the matter. He's doing his best to fish out the culprits and, of course, deliver justice alongside the police and the judiciary. So we'll keep our eye on Anambra, and the more we know, the more you will know as well. 1 million Lagosians cannot be wrong. Thanks for tuning in to the radio station of the year. I've got a great show for you, starting with the big 3 global edition. Let's talk about Western financiers pulling out of the East Africa oil pipeline and Chinese financiers stepping in. Then let's talk about the growing tensions between South Africa and the US over Russia. And then let's talk about the UK government probing the Royal Mail for not meeting targets. Oh, yes. At 4 o'clock, Hard Facts Awards will make a comeback. Yes, it's back. On Eyes and Nays, let's talk about the National Assembly leadership races and the president's $800 million loan request. After that, Music and Moments with Ifeanyi and Sam will take the air. Ifeanyi, Sam and Dexter, that is. Expect news, business and sports at the top of the hour every hour. But let's get started with today's Big 3 Global Edition Lagos. I'm Sandra Ezekwesili, and these are your hard facts.
The Big 3 Global Edition on Hard Facts.
Africa need to prioritize investment over trade, and does this sign over the West? Does South Africa cards to avoid choosing between Russia and the USA? Can Nigeria learn from OfCom's probe into the Royal Mail? Let's talk every Friday. We should let Nigeria rest a bit, and instead we look at what's the hearts of the world, right? We look at the biggest international stories of the week. And joining us as usual to look at these stories and provide context and to think about the tough questions is Chief Andy Oboforebo. Chief, welcome back to Hard Facts. Good to have you here.
Great to be back, and congratulations. Great to be back on the station of the year.
Oh, yes. Tell us. Thank you. Now, Standard Chartered has pulled funding from the East Africa crude oil pipeline project while China is stepping in. That's our first story, Lagos. Standard Chartered seems to have pulled out because of growing environmental activism against the East Africa crude oil pipeline project. Why is that project so important to Uganda? Why is it generating so much controversy?
Okay, so it's an important project for Uganda because it will help them to the country. Uganda has oil reserves; they can but it's meant to bring out into the world. And one of those other issues was that Uganda does not have access to the ocean. So if they're going to get their oil out, they'll have going to need to pipe the oil from Uganda to another place. So early first to deal with Kenya will work out. So they deal with Tanzania. And so the idea is they'll build a long pipeline, almost 1,500 kilometers long, that will take from the oil wells, on Uganda's western border. It will cross Uganda and go to eastern or southeastern border with TZ, with Tanzania, and then run down to the coast to Tanzania. And then from there, at a port in TZ, the oil can go to everywhere in the world. So it's very, very critical. It's going to make Uganda a lot of money. Like I said, it's going to make them an oil-producing country. So you kind of see why they are very, very gung-ho about it. On the other side, you asked why is it controversial? It's controversial because, well, we're in a world now where there is a lot of hostility towards fossil fuels because of the environment, climate change issues. There's a general, like in the West, there's been a general attitude towards let's not have any more of these major oil projects, fossil fuel projects. So that's one level of the outrage. There's a second level that comes down to the specifics of this pipeline. So this pipeline runs across a lot of area. As you know, East Africa has a wildlife and a lot of vegetation life that, is like considered very valuable, very precious. It's, where, the cradle of life, of human life and all of that. And this particular pipeline, because of the nature of Uganda's crude oil, Uganda doesn't have Bonny light oil like we do here. And the nature of the crude oil that they have, it's called waxy oil, so it's hard to get it through a normal pipeline. You have to warm up the pipes.
I see.
So you have to keep the pipes warm. And keeping those pipes warm for the oil to flow means generating a lot of heat, a lot of carbon, right? Do that. So it's not just a neutral pipeline sitting there, it's a pipeline that is with the speed they go over just constantly. And so the activists say this is going to seriously increase the output of carbon emissions from Uganda and Tanzania, because the pipeline runs through both of those countries. And then also the heat from the pipeline is going to disturb the ecosystem there, the vegetation life and the wildlife. So there's been a lot of anger. The European Parliament has actually condemned the project and said, EU countries should have nothing to do with it. It's been pretty vocal.
But supporters of this project say that, I say that in response to what you said about activists saying that the project will multiply Uganda's carbon output a lot. They even give a number. They said it will multiply Uganda's carbon output by 7, and that's why they consider this project unacceptable. However, supporters of this project say that number is simply because Uganda's emissions are currently quite low because the country has not industrialized or developed. They say carbon emissions are simply the cost of development, and Uganda should not be denied the chance to become a rich nation. This should be an I beg to differ topic. In fact, it has been an I beg to differ topic several times, but maybe we should make it a specific to Uganda now. But yeah, are there merits to both sides of the argument? Where is Esther Bewaji and Ramadan and Tanvita when you need them? Yeah, but are there
Where
merits?
is Ruth Okorocha, the champion of champions?
Where is Ruth Okorocha, the champion of champions? All right, but are there merits to both sides of this argument?
Yes, they are. And I think it's interesting. We have to drill down to what those numbers are.
Okay.
Because, say, if someone says to me, option A will increase this thing times 7, while option B will increase this thing, in this other case, increase the other thing times 2. It will look like option A is the more drastic option, right? But what are you multiplying by 2 and what are you multiplying by 7? 1 times 7 is just 7. Right?
Right.
But 10 times 2 is 20, right? So, if Uganda is starting from a very low level of carbon emissions, maybe multiplying it by 7 is not as big a problem. It's still a problem, but not as big a problem as the current emissions in some of the countries that are condemning this pipeline project right now. So we have to look at that data very well. And then there's the question of, at the end of the day, does Uganda have to make a choice? Is this a situation where if you decide that you're not going to increase your carbon emissions at all as an African country, as a developing country, you're basically condemning yourself, that you're never going to have enough, economic growth. You're never going to have enough energy for industrialization. You're never going to have enough productivity. And at the end of the day, you're stuck in this trap of poverty and relying on the rest of the world for aid, and you're looked down on, and your people are trying to leave your country and you can't get visas and all of that. But maybe you don't have to do what China did and pollute the world a bit and get some development from that, like China did, like Europe did, like the US did, and then come back and say, okay, you know what, now we can stop. So should that burden really be on these poor countries, or should those who polluted first and grew and developed take on that burden and say, especially because for those of them that also benefited from colonialism, should they be saying, you know what, we owe you, pollute on our tab. Each of us has a quota of pollution, you can use ours now. So that each of us has a quota of carbon emission, you can use ours now, that's payback for how we used you, and let's try and come to the playing field. Or are they going to weaponize this to keep African countries perpetually behind? That's the key question.
That's the key question, he says. Lagos, of course, you can join the conversation 0700-993-993-993. Don't forget, Hard Facts Awards coming up at 4. So don't miss that. However, Chief, when we say Standard Chartered has pulled out of funding the project, what exactly were they funding?
Yeah, so they were funding chiefly two things, right? They were funding the construction of the pipeline itself, which also means like the importation of the parts for the pipeline, then also the funding of like infrastructure on both ends of the pipeline, you know, stuff like the ports in Tanzania, which is also being built, and, you know, the terminals to gather, you know, the oil from the different oil fields. All that was being, they were part of, and they're the only funder. They were one of the funders for that. Then the second piece that they are funding is the acquisition of the land that the pipeline runs through.
Okay.
So right now, like, you know, there's a map of where the pipeline will go between Uganda and Tanzania.
Okay.
But, you know, you have to buy the land so that you can run the pipe. So, you know, so there's a company, right? The APOC, the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, you know, company, right? And it's 62% of the company is owned by Total Energies, you know, the energy from Total. They own 60%. The Ugandan UNOC, which is Uganda's own NNPC, the National Oil Company, owns 15%. Tanzania's oil company owns 15%. The rest is owned by the Chinese oil company. And that entity is buying land to build its pipeline. So that money is coming from a loan that entity is trying to get from Standard Chartered, but now Standard Chartered has pulled out, and so the Chinese are coming in to fund it.
Now the Chinese are coming in to fund it. I noticed that the Ugandan and Tanzanian governments are not just seizing the land and giving to the pipeline project. They're actually compensating the landowners at more or less market value. Why don't we do the same here in Nigeria?
The short answer is that the Land Use Act, basically what land use does is it allows the Nigerian government to just say, well, there is an eminent need from, you know, economic need, national security need, and then you step in and seize all the land. And, you know, you say, technically you can pay compensation, or you must pay compensation. But that compensation is set by the government, and they usually set it at like peanuts. But it's not the same in Uganda, it's not the same in Tanzania. They don't really operate that military style, because the Land Use Act is a holdover from our military era. There, it's still much more closer to the, you know, common law that we inherited from the British. So you're going to pay more or less market value
for those pieces of property. Again, Lagos 0700-993-993-993. What do you think about these developments with the EACOP? That's a mouthful, but it essentially means East Africa Crude Oil Pipeline Project. So now, Chief, we have the Chinese government-owned firm CPP stepping in, both to supply the steel pipes themselves and to provide the loans to buy them. Should we expect to see more situations like this, where China ends up financing African projects that the West will not finance because of environmental issues?
Yeah, I think this is going to be very common going forward. because the environmental lobby in the West is getting stronger and stronger, and with good reasons. I'm not like dismissing this. Like, I'm a big believer. Climate change is real. It's a problem. It's a problem that we have to address. We're in trouble. I 100% agree with all of that. Carbon emissions are the major cause of climate change, and we need to get those under control. 100% agree with that. I also believe that climate change is not the only problem on the table. And you have, so for African countries, we have the twin problems. We have climate change, we also have development, and we have to figure out a way to solve the two things at the same time. In the same way that these Western countries, when the war in Russia, between Russia and Ukraine, popped up and their energy security was now at risk, suddenly climate change wasn't the only problem on the table. They said, oh, climate change and energy security. Suddenly they were ready to switch on the coal mines again, the coal plants again, willing to start running natural gas again. So, like, Africans are not just being barbaric and backwards over here. The whole world recognizes that climate change, while a serious problem, isn't the only serious problem, and that the only practical solutions are those that take other problems into account as well and try to find the middle ground.
Because at the end of the day, they're both about survival, aren't they? Both
Yes.
climate change and industrialization are two sides of the same coin, right?
That's right.
Civilization is essentially trying to survive, essentially trying to get through civilization, but the one thing often gets in the way of the other, and so you have to find the right balance to strike. Yes,
that's correct.
And speaking of steel pipes, originally a Russian firm was supposed to supply these steel pipes, but then Russia invaded Ukraine, and Total Energies had to kick them off the project due to the sanctions. So you have the West losing a chunk of its stake in this project due to environmental issues and its war with Russia. Is this the West taking a principled stance? Or is this the West letting politics get in the way of business and losing Africa to China?
Well, why not both? Why can't it be both? I think the West has found itself in an interesting position, and oftentimes, I think, like, my personal view is that the quality of thinking, strategic thinking, in the West may have deteriorated, post-Cold War. So there isn't a lot of very serious thinking at the strategic think tank level, the old school Rand Corporation level, about, well, okay, these are legitimate concerns. How do we play this strategically? I think in a lot of ways, oftentimes the West just assumes that Africa specifically, but the developing world in general, will just go along with them because, well, hey, we're the good guys, right? But like, I think that speaks maybe to a certain amount of hubris and maybe to a certain amount of not keeping track of how the world sees the West. I think maybe pre-Iraq war, the US especially maybe had more moral leverage in the world in the period between the fall of the Soviet Union and the invasion of Iraq, or maybe from till 9/11 and invasion of Afghanistan. The US sort of had a lot of moral authority in the world, especially with the way they were going around and putting sanctions on dictatorships and helping promote democracy. So there was a lot of international goodwill for the West, especially in light of how they handled the fall of the Cold War and Russia afterwards. But I think post-Iraq, that there's a shift in perception where the West is seen as a bad faith actor that does things that benefits itself and then has another set of rules for other people. And when you realize that, then you're asking Africans and others to play ball with you and give up on their interests because you have an interest at play. It's not going to work for us, brother. So I think that's kind of what's happening. The West has to have a rethink.
Okay, Lagos, if you just tuned in, Fridays, we take a look at what's happening in other parts of the world, the biggest international stories from this week. We bring them your way. And this week, Standard Chartered pulled funding from the East Africa Crude Oil Pipeline Project, EACOP, while China is stepping in. That was our first story. Standard Chartered seems to have pulled out because of growing environmental activism against the project, the East Africa Crude Oil Pipeline Project. I've got our usual guest on Big Three Global on the show with me, Chief Andy Oboforbo, and he's been answering my questions, thinking these questions through with me right here on Hard Facts, on your number one station for talk, which is also best radio station in Nigeria. Chee. Okay. I want to hear your thoughts. 0700-993-993-993. We've got 1 minute, less than a minute before we go on a break. So that's enough time for you to mull over some of the things that we've just talked about. WhatsApp is 080-959-75805. 080-959-75805. And of course, we're streaming live on Facebook. Facebook is Nigeria Info 99.3. Nigeria Info 99.3. What are your thoughts on this project? What are your thoughts on the pushback by the climate advocates? What are your thoughts of China moving in while the West is pulling out? What do you think about these developments with this project in East Africa? Hold that thought. After this break, you'll share your thoughts with me. Don't go away.
The talk doesn't stop. Join the conversation on the air and online. Twitter at Nigeria Info FM. Facebook Nigeria Info 99.3. And on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos. Let's talk.
Leading the conversation.
We black people must understand what is really going on.
Import milk, sugar, toothpaste, handkerchief, pencil. We don't make.
Presenting the facts.
Sincerely, I don't want to wait till I graduate from this school before I think of what to do with my life.
Exactly. I am going to seriously work on my music skills. Let me use my talent well, big.
I would like to be a radio presenter, but I don't know how to go about it.
But why is Simi so quiet today?
Sorry, ladies. I'm taking this interesting course on how to become a professional scriptwriter. You too can also learn how to become a radio presenter on Wazobia Academy.
Wazobia Academy?
Yes, Wazobia Academy provides accessible and affordable online training in filmmaking, music business, fashion, radio hosting, and lots more. You also stand a chance to be selected for internship in leading production companies, radio stations, music, and fashion studios for hands-on experience. It's easy. Simply log on to www.wazobiaacademy.com or call 0908-826-5038 for more details.
Wazobia Academy. Learn and lead.
Sandra, why do you have a picture of yourself with Father Christmas? Are you a child?
Yes, I'm a child. I took that picture at Agbaya Link Up in December. It was so much fun. The best part is the next edition is happening on May 27th, 2023 at Meadow Hall, Lekki. There will be lots of food, bouncing castles, face paintings, water gun fights, PlayStation, Sega, swings, cheese balls, inter-house sports competitions, and an insane after party.
You are really an Agbaya.
Yes, so you self can be an Agbaya too. Visit at Agbaya Link Up on Twitter and Instagram to get your ticket. For sponsorship and inquiries, call 0810-073-0222.
This event is proudly sponsored by Mirinda, Pepsi, Cool FM, Too Short, Port TV, Cadbury, and Raven Bank.
99.3 Nigeria Info.
Your number one station for talk. Let's talk.
Let's talk about our first story. For that story, I took you to Uganda, where Standard Chartered and a lot of Western financiers have pulled funding from the East Africa Crude Oil Pipeline Project. China is stepping in, and these groups seem to have pulled out because of growing environmental activism against the East Africa Crude Oil Pipeline Project. I've got Chief Andy Oboforbo on the show with me. Fridays, we take a look at the biggest international stories of the week. 99.3, hello. Hello. Thanks for calling. What's your name, sir?
Yeah, I'm Joshua, first-time caller.
Joshua, first-time caller. Talk to me. Welcome.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm really enjoying your show here.
Thank you.
Yeah. To my own contribution over the news I just heard, it's very, very important, because any country that wants to move further, please, nobody should deny them of the pride, because my country, Nigeria, our leaders in this country, they are not ready to help us. So I believe maybe they will see what other countries are trying to generate in their own country, so Nigeria can learn from them, because like this now, this country, I don't know where Nigeria is going, and we are about to elect. We have already elected a new president, which is about taking over in a week's time. So, please, we should give support to Uganda. We should all give support to Uganda if they are ready to do this project.
Okay, all right. Thank you, John, for calling for the first time. Godman is on the line. Hi, Godman.
Good afternoon, Sandra.
Good afternoon. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Okay, I just want to ask, because I don't know, I want to get this to Chief. Could it be that this is like a persecution, indirect persecution for Uganda? Because some of the policies that the West brings to them, they reject it outrightly. So could this be an indirect persecution on them?
Indirect what? Repeat that word again. Indirect what?
Persecution. Like,
persecution, okay. Mm-hmm.
You don't accept some things and people are maybe offended because you're not accepting the policies. They're looking for ways to persecute you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so that's the question.
That's your question, Godman. Thank you very much for calling to ask. Chief, do you believe this is persecution? Some sort of reciprocity? I don't know.
You mean with
from the West towards Uganda? Yes.
Well, I think Uganda isn't exactly a favorite of the West right now due to some of the human rights issues. But ultimately, I think what we've seen is that Western nations don't let that get in the way of good business deals in Uganda. This is purely down to the environmental factors. And I think also the loss of the Russian steel also made it a bit harder to get a good deal here for the Western financial interest. But China is coming with their own very cheap steel. And
all right, so in Africa for our second story, South Africa and the US are in a diplomatic spat over Russia. The US ambassador to South Africa accused the country of giving arms and ammunition to a Russian ship that docked there earlier this month. The South Africa government condemned the statement, but only half denied it. They then summoned the ambassador and announced that he had apologized, but he said something a bit different. Now, I've been watching the TV show The Diplomat on Netflix, and so now that I'm seeing this thing play out, I'm like, aha, I know what happened there. We've talked about South Africa maintaining a neutral position about the Russian invasion of Ukraine before, Chief, in part because of their shared history with Russia. What are the roots of that history? Can you tell me about that?
Sure, Sandra. So, of course, during apartheid, the USSR was a big supporter of, the ANC, the Inkatha Freedom Party, the PAC, basically all the South African groups that were fighting against the anti-apartheid regime. A lot of them even got like paramilitary training in the USSR. So it was not just South Africa. You saw it in Mozambique, in Angola, in lots of parts of Africa. Basically, the USSR positioned themselves as, we will help you fight your colonial oppressors. And so that goodwill carries on till today.
And then you mentioned that the entire Soviet Union supported South Africa, but both Russia and Ukraine were part of the USSR. So how come the loyalty of the South African government is only to Russia and not the Ukraine?
Well, that's the irony of life, Sandra, because even while the USSR was fighting colonialism in Africa and funding anti-colonialism in Africa, the USSR itself was a product of colonization, with Russia conquering basically all these other nationalities and calling it a union and saying, oh, we're all together, we're all equal. But within the union, there was inequality, with Russia being dominant. And so that's why even when we were kids, we were always saying the Russians. We weren't saying the Soviets. So, in a lot of ways, Russia got all the glory and also flack for everything that happened through the Soviet Union. And so it's ironic that South Africans are not seeing that, a lot of that money that came to help South Africa in anti-apartheid was come from the point of the Ukrainians, right? And, now at the end, the Ukrainians invaded again, and it's like, I'm sorry, but your oppressor helped me in my fight. So sorry.
So let's come to the accusation from the U.S. here. They accuse South Africa of arming the Russian ship. The South Africans said that the government never authorized anything like that, but I noticed that they did not actually say that the arming did not happen. Was the phrasing intentional, or should we not read meaning into it?
No, I think now we can read meaning into it. It's really because of the latest development now, where President Cyril Ramaphosa has actually ordered an investigation into what happened. So that phrasing was very careful. It wasn't a denial. It was not a denial that arms were given to the ship. It was a denial that the government was the one that ordered the arms to be given to the ship. Anyone who has children, especially very smart children, will recognize that type of denial when they hear it. So, when I heard that, I was like, oh, something happened there. Oh, something happened there. And then now that President Ramaphosa has ordered the investigation, I think it's safe for all of us to say the South African government thinks it could have happened, but the order was not from above, or they want it to look like the order was not from above. This could really just be also, what they call plausible deniability, where the president needs to be able to say, what? What arms? Hey, how'd that happen? Hey, no, oh my goodness, this is terrible. I'm investigating right away.
Sheriff,
what? No.
Not Sheriff Quadri, it's a joke. Okay, so while that is happening, though, the South African government has summoned the U.S. ambassador, or they did summon the U.S. ambassador. They said that the U.S. ambassador apologized profusely, but the U.S. ambassador said he simply clarified his statement. Now, you understand diplomats speak. You speak, diplomats speak. What do you make of this big difference between how both sides are describing that conversation?
This is typical diplomatic rascality. It's like, guy, I know what you did. I know what you did. I know what you did. But let's just say I don't know what you did and you don't know what I did, and let's go out and say it like that. And that's basically what they've done here. They each have been able to walk away with a statement that saves face, right? Basically, the South African government doesn't want to come across like the US scolded them. So the ambassador apologized in private. Ambassador also doesn't want to look like he walked something back. So he said, well, I clarified for them. Now, the truth is somewhere in the middle. But the fact that an investigation is being ordered tells you that the ambassador probably didn't apologize.
The South African business community is very worried, though. They're very worried about crossing the USA, especially because of something called AGOA, AGOA. What's that? Why is it critical to South Africa?
So that it's a U.S. law. And basically what it does is it when you're trading, exports from my country to your country, I usually have to pay a tariff.
I thought Chief was going to tell us the full meaning of AGOA. AGOA is the African Growth and Opportunities Act. But
I'm sorry, I should have led with that.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
African Growth and Opportunities Act. Sorry.
Yes. And it is a U.S. law that lets some African countries send exports to the U.S. without paying tariffs. All right, back to you, Chief.
Well, you've answered the question.
No, go on. There are more things to tell us. Could you tell us?
Yes. So South Africa really benefits a lot from AGOA. It lets them put their goods in the U.S. without paying serious tariffs. And they benefit from that, like the automotive industry. South Africa assembles lots of cars for U.S. brands and for the U.S. market. And the only reason that those cars can get into the U.S. is that they're not paying tariffs. So now there's a question, will the U.S. cancel South Africa's subscription to the AGOA? And if they do, suddenly South Africa doesn't have a market. Now, Russia does not import lots of stuff from South Africa. So there's so it ends up being you please the Russians and the Americans starve you. So, of course, China is actually South Africa's biggest trade partner. They've finally overtaken the US as their biggest trade partner. But here's the problem. China mostly imports raw materials from South Africa, but the US imports finished manufactured goods from South Africa. And so if you're a nation that wants to be developed and you want to industrialize, you're trying to move from being an exporter of raw materials to a manufacturer and a producer. And so you're looking for partnerships with countries that let you do that and are ready to import your consumer goods. And that's who the US has been for South Africa. So if that ends, it might cause even more problem for a very wobbly South African economy.
And this brings me to was this topic the final topic between Ruth and Ramadan, where she became champion of champions, where they debated that China is a better partner for Africa than the West. So at the moment, South Africa is hobnobbing or romancing with Russia. The US doesn't like this, but you have Russia also knocking on the, China knocking on the door, trying to take South Africa out on a date. Are we going to have more and more African countries moving away from the West, turning towards the East? Does this serve African countries? Is that a better partnership for African countries than partnership with the West?
Yes and no. So it depends. So I think you have to ask yourself that question. So a South Africa is very different from, say, a Mali or a Chad or a Uganda or a Libya. A South Africa is a more sophisticated economy. It's an industrialized economy that's trying to grow. So China probably can't give them a lot. They need a lot more from the US and Europe, right? But for other countries in Africa, these like less industrialized countries, China is a good route probably for economic development for now. So there's that to think about. Then there's also to think about who is China good for and who is the West good for, governments or citizens. Now, of course, it's a mixed bag with the West. But if your government is rigging your elections and oppressing your people and clamping down on your human rights, you're more likely to get sanctions and other issues from a Western country than from China. China doesn't care.
But you're also going to get congratulatory messages.
Yes, that's why I said more likely. I didn't say it's definite.
Right.
But you know that China will definitely send a congratulatory message. China will definitely not impose sanctions for a rigged election or for shooting people at a toll gate or for, all manner of like human rights abuses. China has made a position very clear about that. Those are internal matters. We don't interfere. But, depending on which US government you catch, then there's also, you look at it from the point of a citizen. Everybody's Japan, but nobody Japas to China. You get why, So when you look at those things from the perspective of a citizen sitting down in your house, it's sweet to talk Aluta Continua and Lumumba and all of these things, and I agree with all of them. But if you think about it at a micro level, not a macro level, maybe the picture looks a bit different.
All right. So knowing all of this, can South Africa afford to lose U.S. trade relationship over this? And if they cannot afford to lose the trade relationship, why are they playing this game between Russia and America?
It's a great question, Sandra. And I think it comes down a lot to just the nature of democracy. An ANC government remains in power due to support from the Black South African population. And the Black South African population maybe cares less about the AGOA than they do about their sentimental connections to Russia. So these are some of the issues that come up when you're balancing things democratically. This is not the first time we've seen Cyril Ramaphosa, who was always known as a relative moderate, taking some very strong positions that may endanger his country economically simply because of pressure from his party. So I think that's part of the issue, that some of the complications that South Africa faces. But hey, if Ramaphosa, by the way, is one of the people who brokered the peace in Northern Ireland, the Good Friday Agreement. So if anyone can figure out how to navigate this tight situation, maybe it's Cyril.
Lagos, join the conversation. 0700-993-993-993 as we get ready to bring you our third story. Our third story is the UK government probing the Royal Mail for not meeting targets. Of course, they're doing that probe using OfCom. I'll tell you about that in a bit. 01465 7190 01465 7190 0700 993 993 993. We've got WhatsApp too. WhatsApp is 080 959 75805. 99.3. Hello. Thanks for calling us. Hello.
Hi, Sandra. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I say hello to our greatest judge.
What's your name, sir?
You have a Paru here to
talk to me.
John, I agree with him to some extent, very large extent especially.
Okay.
But you should not even forget, even Nigeria as a country was pro-Russia in the 70s.
Yes.
Because of the colonial impact and the great African brotherhood that we had then.
Yes.
But at a point, you cannot tell me that Africa will want to lean towards China. China does not have that leadership role in the future of the world, and that is the reality. Where there might be a balancing factor with their collaboration with Russia, but the truth is that China cannot lead that, and the whole of African citizens themselves cannot even enjoy the leadership under China or Russia. Because eventually what will happen, because whether you like it or not, Africa is the playing field now. For instance, look at what is happening in Sudan, look at Mali, look at Burkina Faso, look at Central African Republic, even Libya. The disruptive impact of Russia cannot be under or overestimated. And there's nobody, even though they have their competitors like the West now, nobody would allow that to go. And it will get to a point where the citizens themselves will realize that Russia would not do anybody any good. Although the West have their problems, but to some extent, they see some elements of accountability in dealing with them. Now, what Ramaphosa is doing, you may not want to say Ramaphosa is right or wrong. Just like what the chief said, the traditional supporters of the ANC would not want to do anything with America. For instance, that is even hypocritical of them. They condemn the ANC now. They condemn Israel when Israel invaded Palestine up to today.
Yes.
But they have not condemned Russia invasion of Ukraine. Is that not hypocrisy?
It is.
So that is it. No, so in diplomacy, just like he's saying, nobody will be absolutely right or wrong. But I think the effort Ramaphosa is playing right now, leading about 6 countries to Russia and Ukraine, is just for me what you call eye service here. And it's of no impact. And Africa does not have any role to play in bringing the war in Russia to an end. That is the fact. Thank you.
Thank you very much for calling, Titi Lokwe. I don't know where the time flew to, but I quickly want to talk about our third story. For our third story, we're leaving Africa. So we went to East Africa and South Africa. Now let's go to Europe now. They're not part of Europe anymore. In the map, are they still part of Europe?
Geographically, yes.
Yes.
Really
okay, all right. Now, for our third story, let's go to the UK. OfCom, the UK communications regulator, is probing the Royal Mail for failing to deliver mail on time. As in their own night post. The government is probing their own night post for failing to deliver items on time. The first thing that tripped me about this story, Chief, the Royal Mail itself, their own night post themselves, now it reports themselves to the regulator. As in, the Royal Mail itself reported itself to OfCom. They said, look, we failed to meet our performance targets for 2022. And I'm like, oh my God! How do you get a system where the stakeholders themselves are self-reporting their failures before the regulator probes them? How does that happen? How can we get that? I want some of that.
It's a multiplicity of things. It comes from one, data transparency. I feel like Alex is somewhere saying yes, because when you have data transparency, then even you as the Royal Mail, you know that even if you try to hide this thing, it's just a matter of time, when, Freedom of Information Act actually works. So when the Sandra Ezekwesili in London, your doppelganger in London says, oh, I want to find Royal Mail data, delivery data from last year, somebody actually has to give that data to you, unlike in some other countries where they will just ignore you, and then when you go on air to talk about it, they say it is hate speech. So, when you have that kind of transparency, it forces everybody to be transparent. I will own my mistake before I'm exposed. That's one.
Right.
Then two, there's also the issue of what do we call it? A vigilant regulator that isn't captured by who he's regulating, right? And then there's also a strong feedback from the public, right? Strong public feedback. What I mean is that if I am sending a letter to you by first class mail, Sandra, and it doesn't arrive in 3 days or on the same day, it arrives 3 days later, I will shout, you will shout. The place we're shouting to, the customer care line, is not, they won't just keep us on hold and be, eating amala. Somebody will log it, clock it, and push it. So because of that, and have come to expect that feedback. So, it becomes a situation where people have to take action, right? When I lived in the UK, they used to have a program, I don't know if it's still there now, called Watchdog. This is on TV. A TV program where people are reporting to OfCom and to other regulators what people have done, what government agencies have done to them. And it's all being put on TV, and they say, oh, they put this agency last week, this is what has now happened, right? That openness of the process of probing also leads to more probing and self-reporting.
And I want to even look at the targets themselves, right? The targets require Royal Mail to deliver 93% of first-class mail within 1 working day of collection, deliver 98.5% of second-class mail in 3 working days of collection, and complete 99.9% of delivery routes. Very high targets. What does it say about the system that failing to meet such high standards is met by a probe?
It says a simple thing, which is there in the Bible, that to whom much is given, much is expected. And it works the other way around. From whom much is expected, more is produced. I've known this in all my life as a leader, as a manager. Set high standards, people will deliver high standards. But if you keep the standards low and you say that anyone who pays salaries is a superhero, you will end up with mediocre results. I have known it, I have seen it. I always used to say that there's this construction company, the German construction company that does a lot of work in Nigeria. I won't name them. And you will see people always say, oh, their work is so great, their work is standard, right? But the people doing the work are not Germans. They are Nigerians. Those engineers, those technicians, they've worked for that company, they will still work for another company. And you have to ask yourself, why is it that when they work for the German company, they deliver to a standard? But when those same engineers are taking to work somewhere else, they deliver to a lower standard. So it's not about the skill of the people. It's about what standard they're being held to by their own management, and what metrics are in place to judge that standard, and what systems are in place to monitor them to deliver that standard. These are the things that actually make the difference. But when you start by saying, oh, deliver target 10%, you will get 10%. Like, that is just what it is.
I'm thinking about the problems that we face here with service delivery here. And I'm not even talking about the people who have to go and deliver food for somebody and they will eat the food or they'll run away with the food and stuff like that. Let's not even get into that, But let's come to some examples like dropped calls, or failed bank transfers. How do we get from here to the point where, like in the UK, it just becomes standard to expect high service delivery and there are probes when it falls short?
It comes from people agreeing to be angry and agreeing to make noise and agreeing to shout and agreeing to hold service delivery people to a higher standard. Like, see, they know me at my disco. They know me at my ISP. They know me at my telco. They know my wife at the bank. Because any small problem, we've called, we're shouting. Any small problem, we say, you know what, you can't solve it, I'm calling the regulator. We have written an email to the regulator. And what does that create? It creates an incentive for them to sit up and do their job. But the thing is that our system and our culture teaches us from a very young age to accept,
to leave it for God,
as Deborah Pamzat will call it, the mediocre. Like when you were talking on Monday about the NYSC, and you made that point about the condition of camps, that the organization camps and the conditions of the Corpers Lodge. It's also the same thing in our boarding schools. From that early stage, we're telling Nigerians that if you complain about broken window or the smell of urine and all of this, people laugh at you and say, oh, you can't manage. What we're teaching ourselves as a society is that it is a virtue to accept to live in muck. It is a virtue to accept to live in filth and in ruin and in decay and in chaos. That means you are strong and you can manage. And that those who insist on a higher standard, you're soft, Ajebota. But you see, it's Ajebotas that built the UK. It's Ajebotas that built the US. You can't have soft life without hard standards.
Oh, quotable. I'm going to tweet that. You can't have soft life without high standards. We've got messages on WhatsApp. Anthony, Peter Ayoronde from Anthony says, Sandra, I believe the East African region is becoming the hope of progressive Africa. When I look at the reawakening of Tanzania and Rwanda, no one is also giving my president of the year, the Malawi president, enough focus. The East Africa are the best regional cooperation, even up to sports level. These countries are showing strong stand against institutionalized corruption, and I believe their plans for regional development will blossom whether the West pulls out or not. These kinds of countries would have flourished better if other regions and countries around them were ambitious and aggressively developing. I don't know when this continent will realize that she is all that she needs. Europe and the West can depend on international trade and all, but Africa is a continent that can self-rely on herself. Imagine what can be achieved off the big regional countries become industrial hubs. What has been left undone aside leadership awakening are continental integration, intercommunication, intertrade, and the likes. West Africa has a big brother that is both sleeping and obese with corruption, so her mentees are not guided or unified towards a mission. Chief, I want to ask a question. Aside Nigeria, who is West Africa's champion? Who in West Africa can champion or lead the progressive course for West Africa? Ghana, war-torn Mali, or the winking and waiting arms of Morocco? Morocco is not West Africa now. Morocco is North Africa.
Yeah, but Morocco is trying to enter West Africa by fire by force. They want to join ECOWAS. They see in West Africa a leaderless, sleeping situation, and they want to step in with their money as the leader. So yeah, fair point.
Okay.
Yeah. So honestly, I don't know the way forward for West Africa if Nigeria doesn't just become alive to its responsibility and lead the thing.
Peter also says the caller who said China has little or no leadership ability in the future of Africa is wrong. They are clear with their policy that they see Africa as a continent, not as a country, and they see individual countries as separate entities. They want to be a whip-holding daddy. Or relate not as our leader, so to speak. I don't know why our position of thought is servant to master, follower to leader, rather than aspire to develop as a liberated entity whose policy is to collaborate with China or the US from the position of literally developing nations. Peter, thanks for your message. We've got this one here from Alaba Lakbe, who says, to be honest with you, China is more useful to the African race than the West. Look, do you know the amount of business worth billions of dollars China has invested in Africa for the last 15 to 20 years? The US only supports Africa when it is time to sell ammunitions. Please, I want your guest to tell us the role of the US in the ongoing internal war in Sudan, and also the role of the US in Libya before and after the death of Gaddafi. Look, I'd rather go with China than the US, because also each family in Africa trades with Chinese products, and this puts more money in their pockets and also put more food on their table. All right. Ayaba Esteri from Badagry says, Chief, I believe I speak for most Nigerians when I say I much prefer a US-led world order to a Chinese one. Reason is because of China's very poor human rights record and very fluid business ethics. Besides, nobody wants their life to be controlled by the state. As Chief said, nobody did japa to China now. Ayaba Esteri, thank you for your message. Feni Mendieta says, Sandra, I love your attire today. Oh, thank you. The black traditional is amazing. Let's start exporting it here. There's market. Very Mendieta, how is that related to what we're talking about? However, thank you. I appreciate it. Let's take a look at this one here from Pastor Daniel. Pastor Daniel says, Nigeria Info deserves the award 10 times. Congratulations. Know that you don't just have 1 million Lagosians. We are more than 3 million listening to your radio stations. Actually, yeah, we have almost 3 million listening to Nigeria Info. We just have over 1 million listening to Hard Facts. The Hard Facts show itself, over 1 million. But the entire station, almost 3 million. Pastor Daniel says, I've been addicted to this station since 2012. Honestly, Chief Andy is an institution himself. What is Nigerian government doing with this valuable asset called Chief Andy? God will increase him greatly. All right, Pastor Daniel, thank you very much for your message. Chief, your fans have said I should hail you, but that's also my cue to let you go because we're out of time. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Sandra. And please, Nigerian government cannot take me from Hard Facts and from my chieftaincy in Okoche.
All right. Let's bring you business news, Lagos. After the business news, let's have some fun on Hard Facts Awards. My God, my nominees for Nawa Story of the Week. Them plenty. Them plenty. Them plenty.
And now the business news.